So, last class period, we finished up talking a little bit about the Freedom Summer. We talked about how this was the summer of 1964, where people are trying to come together and register African Americans. Remember that only 7% of African Americans who were eligible to vote. So, when are we eligible to vote? 18. So people who were 18 and older who were eligible to vote, only 7% were actually registered. And keep in mind, in order to actually vote, even today, you have to be registered. You have to go and register with your county, your area, in order to go and vote. You can't just walk into the polling stations the day of and just vote. Okay. And just go and vote. So even today, you have to be registered. And so half of the battle in getting African Americans to help them vote is to register them. So the Freedom Summer was all spent trying to register the mass amount of African Americans to go and vote. So during this time, go back real quick. During this 10-week campaign, you had 1,000 people who were arrested, and they were arrested on petty stuff or made up stuff. You had people who were arrested again because there was laws that prohibited people from protesting out in the open, and so holding up signs trying to get people registered, that was a form of what they considered protesting. We're going to talk about how even people are going to be arrested on quote unquote speeding, and so over 1,000 people are arrested. 80 freedom workers are going to be beaten. 37 churches, 30 homes and businesses are going to be bombed and burned to the ground. And those 3 civil rights workers are going to be found dead. And those are the 3 right here. So on June 24th, 1964, James Chaney, Andrew Goodman, and Michael Schwerner are going to be arrested. And again, they are arrested on quote-unquote speeding. So they're arrested. They are put into a jail cell for several hours, just for speeding. They are denied the right to a phone call. And so while they get arrested, they're in the holding cell. No one really knows where they're at. Nobody really knows what's going on with these 3 people. Eventually, what's going to happen is that they will be released. After hours of detainment, they will eventually be released. However, this is where we start to run into trouble. When they are released, they are almost immediately driven off the road, forced off the road by other cars, and they are kidnapped. Days, nobody hears a word for them. Days, nobody has no idea what has gone on with them. So eventually what's going to happen is that the workers, the Freedom Summer workers, the SCLC, they're going to start contacting higher-ups. Eventually, the president hears about the kidnapping, hears the missing poster for those 3 men. He's going to hear about it, and he's going to send in the FBI to investigate their kidnappings. At this point, they've been gone days. They've been missing for days. At this point, they are assumed dead. So at this point in the investigation, yes, they're hoping to find them alive, but they're also just trying to hope to find bodies. They're just hoping to find bodies. And so Attorney General Robert Kennedy, who is again JFK's brother. So during JFK's presidency, Robert Kennedy is the Attorney General. He's appointed Attorney General by his brother. Little quid pro quo going on there. But he's going to be appointed Attorney General by his brother. And then he's eventually going to run for presidency, and he's actually going to also be assassinated. So, family tragedy. One after the other. But
Why they hate the Kennedys so much?
I think it's just the fact that they were running for positions of power, and then some of the stuff that they were running on gained opposition. So Robert Kennedy was really, because he was Attorney General during JFK's presidency, he was involved in a lot of the civil rights movement, protesting and big cases, the things that overturned bans on interracial marriages. And so he's big, he has his hands in a lot of those big cases. And so that gains him a lot of negative attention in like places like the South. And then when he starts running for president, some of his other like big ideas are going to be opposed, and then he's also going to be assassinated after one of the primaries. So this is the car that the three men drove off. Like when they were released from the prison, this is the car that they drove off with, and this is the car that was forced off the road. You can't really tell in this picture, but it is burnt. Like they burned the car to try to like destroy all evidence that might have been left behind, and eventually they will find their bodies. So August 4th, 1964, the bodies of all three were eventually found. In their investigation, like throughout their investigation, people were giving like anonymous tips like, hey, these people are here, hey, these people are here. Throughout their investigation, one of the places that the anonymous tip was given, actually they were able to find like, it was somewhere between like 8 to 10 other bodies, not just like these people, but like 8 to 10 other bodies that had also been like killed. The first sort of burial was one of the bodies of these three was found in that burial grave. The other two bodies, I'm going to show you guys where they were found. This was the other two bodies right here. I don't know if you guys can see that, but here's like the head, the feet. So you can sort of see that. So they were all found right there in that, again, burial. They had to dig up the bodies. Eventually what's going to happen is that 19 people are going to be arrested for this crime. However, not all 19 people are going to be found guilty. And I'll tell you again, just sort of like with like the death of Emmett Till, just like with the murders of Medgar Evers, with the bombings of the 16th Street Baptist Church, with the bombings of the Freedom Riders bus, sometimes justice isn't served until years later down the road. And that's sort of, again, what happens in this case. So 1967, the men were put on trial. So 3 years later, they are put on trial. Oops, sorry. There you go. 7 of the 19 people are going to be convicted on federal charges. However, none of them served more than 6 years. So they kidnapped the 3 men, planned essentially premeditated murder, and they served no more than 6 years for something that would essentially get you life in prison. Would get you life in prison. Again, here you have 2005. Someone do that math for me. 15, 16 years ago? 17 years. I was close. Thank you. 17 years ago, one of them is actually going to be convicted on 3 counts of manslaughter, and then he will serve 60 years in prison. He'll be charged with 60 years in prison. So again, years later after the fact, they are finally charged with the punishment that you would have originally gotten. But again, that's not until years later where they're living their life for that plus years. So 2005, that one person is finally convicted and found guilty. So the Freedom Summer, this whole point is to push through with things like voting restrictions, getting away with voting restrictions, putting into place voting laws. And so one of the biggest and first steps that we get is the passage of the 24th Amendment. We have 27 amendments. 27. We have 27 amendments to our Constitution. We've gone through from the 13th down all the way through. Right now we're at the 24th. So the 24th Amendment bans all poll taxes. Again, today, if you make that comparison, the poll taxes back then would have been charging or paying $20 to go and vote today. That would sort of be the comparison. So something that is granted to you for free by our Constitution, you had to pay almost $20 in order to go and vote. And so the 24th Amendment officially gets away with that. So this is where your guys'